Hieromonk Alexii Altschul is a remarkable man with a remarkable story. He left a career in insurance sales many years ago to follow Christ's command to care for the poor. He and his wife, Matushka Michaela of blessed memory, founded Reconciliation Ministries in Kansas City, Missouri, to heed this call. After the repose of Matushka Michaela, Father Alexis spent some time on Mount Athos before returning to Missouri to start Holy Archangel Michael Skeet. I had the pleasure of meeting Father Alexei initially about 15 years ago at Reconciliation Ministries in Kansas City, and had the joy of crossing paths with him again a little over a year ago at the annual conference of the Brotherhood of St. Moses the Black. And he graciously agreed to sit down with me for this interview. So without further ado, I hope you'll enjoy this episode from my interview with Hieromonk Alexii Altschul.
Reconciliation Ministries was started in 1987, and that was an interdenominational group of Christians that were seeking to serve Christ, especially reflected in serving each other and the people around them. And most of the people around that neighborhood of 31st and Troost in Kansas City, Missouri, there were a lot of single mothers, there were a lot of low-income people, there were a lot of people that were struggling with disturbances in their soul, one kind of another. Addictions were a big issue, prostitution, and in the middle of all of that, we began to just serve the people around us the best way we could. Much of it centered initially upon simply feeding people. And so there was one Thanksgiving when my wife and I, at our home, not far from that area, had a big Thanksgiving turkey giveaway. And so the Kansas City Chiefs gave us 300 turkeys. And so we had turned our living room into like a aisles of a supermarket when people would come through to get their turkeys. And it was a big splash in the neighborhood, and at the end of the day we looked at each other, boxes everywhere and the house torn up, and we said, we're going to have to find another place to do this. So later Matushka Michaela, at that time Thelma, was getting her hair done around the corner at 31st and Troost. So the hairdresser said, well, you should check with Harry. He might have a place. So Harry ended up opening up his place at 31st and Troost to let us rent very inexpensively. And so that was in 88 when we moved in there. And at that time it was simply trying to put into practice the teachings of Jesus and the Sermon on the Mount. And so it was, we called it Focus, which at that time it was the description of our service, which was an acronym for food, occupations, clothing, utilities, and shelter. So we were just doing whatever we could to meet the needs of the people. And so it was bringing together two different groups. It was people that we had known that wanted to serve in some capacity and that had some resources, and people that were in need that had many resources but not much material resources. So as they began to come together, a lot of things began to happen. And so in the midst of that, there was a community that began to emerge. And we had daily prayers, we had a men's house, a women's house. There was a lot of work at the city jail. There were Bible studies, and of course daily meals, as well as food giveaways. And But that started without much agenda. It wasn't like some big thing we were planning on. It was rather, we had read how the early Christians used to send out people into the neighborhoods around where they would gather and inquire who was poor in that area, and then do whatever they could to meet those needs. So when we were in our houses in that area, we went out within walking distance, asking if there was whatever the needs were, and that we didn't know what we could do, but we would at least be able to pray for them and stand with them in their struggle. And so it turned out one day we went to this one house where there was a mom and her husband, and they had 15 kids. And some of those kids had gotten married and had 5-6 kids. And so they had several households living in this 3-story house. And they had prayer meetings in the morning and the evening for their household. And then to do the Bible studies, they had all the kids sit on 3 across on the stairs, like pews, all the way up the stairs. And then they would give testimonies. And so the little 2-year-olds would say, "I thank God for giving me something to eat today," and "I thank God for God," and all these different kinds of things that were very endearing. But in the midst of it, we were seeing this example of this family just doing whatever they could to follow the Lord and to do the best they could in that environment. So we met each other, and that mother and father ended up becoming 2 of our original board members. And so that whole clan moved into our community, and so we were participating together. And so it started in the neighborhoods based on that early Christian concept. But out of it we began to recognize that something was happening. It was like the Lord was beginning to gather us for something further. And so these common themes began to come out. One was the idea of regarding each person as like Jesus said, "Inasmuch as you do it to the least of these, you do it to me." So beginning to really recognize the presence of God in each person that came to us. The second was the idea of bridging the gaps in Christ between rich and poor, black and white, male and female, regardless of the class or the educational background, that the Lord really wanted to see people find each other in Christ. So this was going on like that for a few years. And then one day, this man came into one of our prayer meetings, and he said, after coming to these noon prayer meetings, and he was a happy guy, the young man that lived under a bush in the Kansas City Life Insurance building, homeless. But he had his guitar, and so he would come daily, for the meal and for the prayer meetings. And after a month, he said, "I see you like to pray. I think you should read this book called The Way of a Pilgrim." And so I said, "That sounds interesting." He said, "It's about how to pray without ceasing." So I found that book at a local bookstore, and in the midst of praying the Jesus prayer, everything changed. And so it turned out that the community had become very program heavy. But after this period of more interior reflection and prayer, we began to realize there was a deeper need. And it was before that community, that group of Christians, we went through a 21-day fast. And this particular verse came to us very strongly out of the book of Isaiah that said, "You must take root downward so that you can bear fruit upward." And later we realized that our taking root downward was finding orthodoxy. And the bearing fruit upward would eventually emerge out of that. So that's when we called it Reconciliation Ministries, in terms of your original question. That group, eventually the core group became Orthodox. And then we became St. Mary of Egypt Orthodox Church. And then in about 2001, we formed what we called Reconciliation Services. because at that point it was not just our parish, but it was actually pulling together with the other parishes in Kansas City to be able to be very intentional about serving those that were in need in our midst, but also being able to bridge the gaps between people and bringing that reconciliation in Christ into full form. So,
hello again. Hope you enjoyed this episode from my interview with Hieromonk Alexii. Please subscribe to get notified when new episodes become available, which happens every Friday. And if you enjoy the content on this channel, please consider becoming a patron. There's a link to the patronage page on our website below this video. So thanks so much for your support. Have a great weekend, and we will see you soon.